All right, good afternoon. Just to remind you that at 2:30 p.m. in this room, you will have Ambassador Nebenzia, the permanent representative of the Russian Federation, who will brief you on the end of the Russian presidency of the Security Council. That'll be 2:30 p.m. This morning, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, spoke at the General Assembly's emergency special session on Ukraine. He told the Assembly members that the fighting is raging across the country from air, land, and sea, and that it must stop now. The Secretary General underscored that this escalating violence, which is resulting in civilian deaths, including children, is totally unacceptable. Enough is enough, he added. Mr. Guterres said we are facing a tragedy for Ukraine, but also a major regional crisis with potentially disastrous implications for us all. He noted that yesterday, Russian nuclear forces were put on high alert and that the mere idea of nuclear conflict is simply inconceivable. Nothing can justify the use of nuclear weapons, said Mr. Guterres. He added that he hopes that the direct talks taking place today between Ukrainian and Russian delegations will produce not only an immediate halt to the fighting, but also a path towards a diplomatic solution. He flagged that tomorrow we will launch 2 coordinated emergency humanitarian appeals for Ukraine and the broader region. And he will also, just so you know, at 3 p.m. this afternoon, the Security Council will hold a meeting on Ukraine, and the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Martin Griffiths, will brief Council members in an open session. On the ground, a quick humanitarian update for you. Our colleagues are telling us that days of intense clashes across part of Ukraine have caused civilian casualties and damage to critical infrastructure, with severe humanitarian consequences. Road damage and insecurity has disrupted local supply chains and access to food and other basic items. According to the UN's Human Rights Office, more than 400 civilian casualties have been reported, including more than 100 deaths. The real figure could be considerably higher, as many reported casualties have yet to be confirmed. According to the latest figures from the UN Refugee Agency, more than 500,000 people have already crossed the international borders, mostly towards Poland. An additional 160,000 have been internally displaced. This is likely a significant underestimation, as the numbers are changing by the hour. And our humanitarian colleagues are also warning of the increasingly intense conflict threatens to trigger a humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine and the neighboring countries. We, along with our humanitarian partners, are preparing to rapidly scale up operations once the security situation permits. Local civil society organizations and volunteers who are on the front lines of providing support to everyone in need, including internally displaced people, those impacted by violence, and the people trying to cross the borders. For its part, our colleagues at the World Food Programme are launching a 3-month emergency operation in Ukraine to provide food assistance for people fleeing the conflict. The operation is guided by humanitarian principles of neutrality, impartiality, humanity, and independence. WFP is also on standby to assist refugees in neighboring countries as requested. The World Food Programme teams are on the ground in Kiev and a number of other neighboring countries, leading the emergency telecommunications and logistic cluster on behalf of the UN's humanitarian community. The World Food Programme also warns that the Black Sea Basin is one of the world's most important areas for grain and agricultural production, and that the conflict impact on food security will likely be felt beyond Ukraine's borders. Turning to Human Rights Council, speaking by pre-recorded video message at the opening of the 49th session of the Human Rights Council this morning in Geneva, the Secretary General said human rights are under assault everywhere, but he added that the solutions to the crises we are facing, be it COVID-19, global finance, climate action, lawlessness in cyberspace, or peace and security, the solutions are all rooted in human rights. Turning to conflict, Mr. Guterres said civilians caught up in wars suffer not only violations of their rights to safety and protection, but often their rights to food, clean water, healthcare, education, and jobs. Protecting minorities and promoting economic, social, cultural, civil, and political rights are among the most important conflict prevention tools we have. Through the global grind of advocacy, monitoring, investigation, the Secretary General said human rights defenders, including journalists and lawyers, are standing up for our common humanity, often at great personal risk. Together, he concluded, they are helping to build a world of dignity and equality for all. And he also spoke by recorded video message at the launch, the press launch of the new report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The Secretary General said the report is an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of failed climate leadership. With fact upon fact, the report reveals how many people on the planet are getting clobbered by climate change, he said, adding that coal and other fuels are choking humanity. He called on G20 governments to stop funding coal in their own countries and dismantle their coal fleets. He also called for those financing coal to be held accountable. You cannot claim to be green while your plans and projects undermine the 2050 net zero target and ignore the major emission cuts that must occur this decade. Fossil fuels are a dead end, Mr. Guterres said, for our planet, for humanity, and for economies worldwide. The Secretary General acknowledged the rage and anxiety of people all over the world on this issue and said now is time to turn rage into action. On a related note, in Nairobi, the UN Environment Assembly's in-person meeting kicks off today. As you know, the Assembly is the world's highest environmental decision-making body. Representatives from member states, business leaders, civil society, environmentalists from around the world will come together in person and online to discuss progress on halting plastic pollution, stopping harmful chemicals in agriculture, and deploying nature to find sustainable development solutions, among other topics. As we mentioned, too, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, is also there. The meeting will wrap up on Wednesday to be followed by a special session opening Thursday, focusing on UNEP's 50th anniversary. And back here in the Security Council, Izumi Nakamitsu, the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, briefed Council members this morning on the work being done regarding chemical weapons in Syria. She urged Syria to respond as soon as possible to technical requests from the Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. The OPCW's Technical Secretariat stands ready to deploy a team to Syria once the needed visas have been received. Impunity for the use of chemical weapons is intolerable, Nakamitsu said. Such profound violations of international law cannot continue to go unaddressed and unresolved, she concluded. The Undersecretary General for Peace Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, finished up his 4-day visit to the Central African Republic today. In Bria, in the Haute-Koutou Prefecture, he engaged with community representatives, civil society, women, youth, and local authorities. The people he met with expressed their appreciation, but also called for more support on the security front and human rights monitoring in the area. As part of our support for the restoration of state authority, Mr. Lacroix inaugurated projects under the Community Violence Reduction Program and handed over equipment to local internal security forces and civil servants in Bria. Mr. Lacroix also met with Central African Republic authorities, including the President, Faustin Archange Touadéra, as well as the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He also held talks with the offices organizing the Republican dialogue and the diplomatic community. Mr. Lacroix stressed the mission's continued support for the advancement of political and peace process and called for an inclusive political dialogue. From Sudan, the Integrated Transition Assistance Mission there today issued a new report on the political process that is underway to break the current political impasse, which began after last October's military coup. As you know, the UN mission last month launched a political process consulting with more than 800 people, 1/3 of whom were women, representing many different groups. The mission hopes the new report will help to design the next stage of the process. It stressed that under the outcome can only be Sudanese-made and Sudanese-owned in order to succeed. That statement from them is online. Regarding neighboring South Sudan, the 2022 Humanitarian Needs Overview was launched today. It highlights the humanitarian situation in the country continues to deteriorate. Some 8.9 million men, women, and children are going to require humanitarian assistance this year, compared to 8.3 last year, which is still a huge number. This is due to continued conflict, extensive flooding, deepening food insecurity, inflation, high food prices, and lacked access of basic services. We are, of course, continuing to provide support. And on a related note, in terms of what's going on the ground there, the UN mission in South Sudan says they're appealing to national and local leaders, as well as armed groups, to immediately stop the violence in Unity State. In the past 2 weeks, civilians have been killed, injured, forced to flee in their homes, and humanitarian supplies have been looted. There have also been reports of women being raped. The mission strongly condemns this violence at a time where humanitarian needs are rising and people already reeling from the worst flooding in decades. The mission has also stepped up its community engagement efforts to reduce tensions in Magui, in eastern Equatorial State. This follows clashes among farming communities and herders that led to 3,000 men, women, and children fleeing their homes last week. Quick note from Lebanon, where there was a handover of leadership at the UN Interim Force headquarters in Nekora. The head of mission and force commander, Major General Stefano Del Col of Italy, handed over authority over the mission to Major General Haroldo Lazaro Sainz of Spain. Before handing over command, Major General Del Col applauded the cooperation of the parties for working with him and demonstrating their commitment to collaboration. He said this has helped maintain the remarkable stability in South Lebanon for the past 16 years. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., there will be a hybrid briefing here by Ambassador Lana Nusseibeh, who, as you know, is the permanent representative of the United Arab Emirates and will be presiding the Security Council over the Security Council for the merry month of March. And we thank our friends in 2 countries today for their full payments in full. One of them are our friends in Suva, in Fiji, and the others are in a country that is about 17,000 kilometers away in Western Europe. Quick guess. Close, Spain. You played, you get to ask a question.
Thank you. I have 3, actually.
So our friends in Madrid, we thank them. Thank you.
I have 3, actually. Could you comment on reports that Russia used cluster ammunition in Kharkiv? Also, there are reports about the Wagner Group being operating in Ukraine. Could you comment on that as well?
I don't have any, at this point we'll check, but I have no information on the use of that kind of ammunition. Obviously, what we do not want to see is an escalation of the fighting in any way, including of the use of even more lethal ammunition towards civilians.
And about Wagner?
I don't have any. I don't have any information or comment.
And then just one last. Sorry for this. I asked you yesterday about an incident in the UN office in Kramatorsk in the Donbass.
I've not. I've checked with our colleagues. When we had a security briefing today, did not hear anything about that.
Good.
Ibtisam.
Do you have a comment on the Security Council resolution that was adopted today in the morning regarding Yemen?
Yes. I mean, one thing we've noted is that the resolution reiterates the Security Council's long-standing support for maintaining an open route for commercial imports of food, fuel, and other essential commodities into all of Yemen's ports, which is, critical because Yemen is dependent so much on imports for basic commodities, including food. Also supports the ongoing continued remittances, private remittances from outside Yemen into Yemen, which is also a crucial pipeline of cash for Yemeni people. And also, they reemphasize its support for the for our overall aid operations, which I think last year helped over 12 million people.
But do you believe that it could have a negative implication on the ground because it mentions the Houthis as terrorist organization, and you did in the past talk against such measures because it will be...
Right. I mean, we're obviously aware of the reference to Ansar Allah, to the Houthis, as a, quote, terrorist group in the resolution. I think that's a Security Council decision. What we are, what we see also in that resolution is that there's specific assurances in the text confirming that the resolution does not target commercial imports, remittance, and aid operations. We do not at this point expect the resolution to impact the commercial imports, private remittances, or the aid operations. And I think it's very important that the Security Council was very specific in protecting these things.
Sorry, but there are 4 countries that abstained from on voting on this resolution, and one of the reasons that these countries give, or some of them, is the fact that the term or the terminology used to describe terrorism and terrorist acts, etc., that it's not defined under the international law, and it's problematic and could have very negative implications. So are you walking back what you said before?
No, I think, what we had commented on before were on national governments making these decisions, right? Which whenever national governments take decisions on sanctions that could impact our aid operations anywhere in the world, we need to have special waivers and permissions. It complicates things and can be very complicated. In this resolution, which is sovereign decision of the Security Council, what we're seeing is a specific carve-outs, if I can use that term, to ensure that those critical activities for the Yemeni people and for our aid operations are able to continue. And as far, from what we see in the resolution, in our assessment, there's nothing in the resolution that would require national governments to take further steps in terms of designation. Yes, sir. If you don't mind, just take off your mask when you talk, because it's easier for me to...
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
So we know that last Saturday, SG and the Ukrainian President Zelensky had a phone call, and according to the readout, they talked about the humanitarian situation there. But Zelensky also said on Saturday that he asked the SG to strip Russia of its vote as the UN Security Council as a punishment. So I just want to know what the SG replied, and forgive of my knowledge, maybe, would that be possible?
Okay, let me just put it this way. We can only speak to what, I give readouts about what my boss says, right? Others give readout about what their boss says, and the two make a conversation. What is clear, if anybody takes the time to read the charter, is that the Secretary General does not have that authority in any way, shape, or form. Madame.
Steph, my question is a little like the question my colleague asked. Is there in the charter, or I don't know where, an article that stipulates that if a country does not comply with the principle of the charter, that country can be expelled from the UN?
Well, I think I would encourage everyone to read the charter. Issues having to do with member states' membership and member state action is regulated by the member states themselves. Stefano and then Alan.
Thank you, Stéphane. We heard the Secretary General, the General Assembly, and we heard then the Ukrainian ambassador and then the Russian ambassador. What is the reaction of Secretary General? Because apparently it looks like they have a total opposite view of who started this war. The Russian ambassador has been saying practically that the war was started by Ukraine years ago. So what is the reaction of the Secretary General on this?
Well, I mean, listen, the General Assembly is a stage from which member states state out their position, often opposite positions. I think the Secretary General's stance on what is going on in Ukraine has been very clear. He made a direct appeal to President Putin to stop the military operations. What we want to see is a stop to the fighting, right? Our focus at this point is on the humanitarian. This is what we're able to do. We're trying to work on, to operate in extremely difficult circumstances on the ground in Ukraine. We want to see dialogue prevail. I mean, we saw a first round of talks today between Russian and Ukrainian delegations. From what I see in the news, I think those have concluded. We hope that there will be others. It's the only way out of this current crisis. Mr. Bulcati.
I have two short questions, please, Stéphane. First, there are reports that Kyiv is using phosphor munition on the Kyiv. Does the UN have any information?
Is using what?
Phosphor munitions as far as phosphorus.
Oh, phosphorus. Okay.
Yeah,
okay. And your second question?
I mean, as far as I know, it's prohibited by humanitarian law. I don't know. I'm not quite sure. And the second question, is the SG seeking to talk to President Putin? Or did he have a conversation?
The Secretary General's good offices and availability to speak to all the leaders in this conflict remains remains. On your question about phosphorus, it's the same answer I would give. I think it was Benno who asked about cluster munition. I don't have any confirmation. What we do not want to see is a spiraling downward of people using increasingly lethal and, if not, outlawed weapons. But again, I have not seen any of those reports, whether it's the cluster bomb or whether the phosphorus, and I have no way of confirming whether that is actually happening. Yes, Ali.
Thank you, Stéphane. Russia has mounted two major allegations that in the heart of the United Nations work. One, Russia has accused the Ukrainians of committing genocide in eastern Ukraine. I wonder whether the UN has anything to say about this fact or false, or I don't know. Second, Russia has been saying also now that what they're doing is denazification of Ukraine. So this is a major role that the United Nations played after the World War. And I wonder whether you have anything to say about that as well.
I'm not going to start commenting on some of the rhetoric we've heard. I think it is very important to see not only a stop in the military activities, but a lowering of tensions, which includes in what is being said. On the issue of genocide, I think what is clear is I don't know if you were here, but last week I think the Secretary General was asked the question by one of your colleagues. He answered very clearly, which is that for the United Nations, the use of the term genocide has to be is designated through a very well-established legal process. And I would also add that our UN Human Rights Office continues to have people on the ground in eastern Ukraine and to report back what they see. Okay, let's go to Joe Klein and then Abdelhamid.
Yes, thank you. My question kind of relates to the comments that you read out from the Secretary General on the urgency of climate change, but also its relationship to what's happening in Ukraine. There are many experts who are saying that Germany in particular may have speeded up its move to green energy from fossil fuels too quickly and then found itself overly dependent on the import of natural gas from Russia, other European countries, similar boat, even the United States. So these experts are saying that actually to treat climate change in this context as the most urgent priority may have actually enabled President Putin reduce the leverage of his control over these energy resources and also help fund his war machine. So I'd like to know whether you, Secretary General, have any comment on that. Thank you.
I mean, Joe, those are very interesting points that deserve analysis by people, but just not by a spokesperson for the Secretary General. I think it is. We've always felt that there's been that climate change is an overarching issue in this world. But I have no more insights. I have no insights on why these policies were enacted or not enacted. So I leave it for you and your colleagues to write about it, and I look forward to reading it. Okay, Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. Last Friday, the Prime Minister of France, his name is John Castex, excuse me if I pronounce his last name wrongly, gave a speech in an annual dinner of major Jewish organizations in France. And hear what he said. He said, "I will not stop saying that Jerusalem is the capital of Jews." He said that Jew, not Israel, Jews. So what is your comment on that? Doesn't that make a mockery of France's crocodile tears about international law and violation of the UN Charter when the Prime Minister gives such a statement?
Abdelhamid, I haven't seen that speech. I have no particular comment. I would just refer you to the Secretary General's own position on Jerusalem, and that is, and he's been saying it literally from day one, is that Jerusalem is a seat for three great religions, and that's his position. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Oh, Oscar, please. Sorry, you have a question.
Yes, Stéphane, thank you. Just to follow up again as well about Ukraine, and from the Security Council meetings, and going to now to the General Assembly meetings of the violations of the UN Charter. In this meeting on this conflict, what does this mean from the Ukrainian people conflict at this point in terms of peace and security, when they are expecting a hope of the end of the war at this moment, when we're seeing that the history is being written with blood and with many conflicts around the world that it seems like never ends. So in this regard, can you explain to us what really that means for, it could be means for the Ukrainian people?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Oscar. I mean, we are working to support the people of Ukraine through humanitarian operations. We're trying to assess the situation in very difficult circumstances. We're trying to assist those women, men, and children who are fleeing Ukraine as refugees, and trying to assist the countries on the border who have opened their arms and who hopefully will continue to open their arms to all people fleeing Ukraine, and not just Ukrainians, but we know there are a lot of other nationalities, people of different nationality, different race, different religion who are fleeing Ukraine. They also need to be treated as refugees. We keep doing whatever we can to support diplomacy, and we will continue to call for an end to the conflict.
Okay, and then the humanitarian crisis, we're seeing that hundreds of thousands of people are trying to flee the situation. And they're getting stuck on the roads because there's so many for one road trying to leave the country. And the weather is a major factor as well for those Ukrainian people leaving the country. In this regards, how the UN is working on to support.
Well, we're trying, our colleagues on the ground are trying to support these people. We're trying to get more of an operational update, but we're trying to help in whatever way we can the people who are stuck on these roads. Okay. Ms. Kubiak, please. Thank you.